I'm pretty excited to be here. I have had Canada on my bucket list for I don't know how long, and I've been able to tie in catching up with friends, both in Vancouver, in Montreal and here, and to be able to wrap it up with the WordCamp is great. It's going to be awesome come tax time, but it's also awesome because the WordCamp is a great opportunity to catch up with friends from the press community that I've known for a really, really long time. This is the first time I've delivered this talk, so I'm sorry I'm going to be reading quite a lot of it. I'll do my best to try and keep my head up and keep you engaged. I prepared it because the impact of remote work and the management of diverse and cross-culturally diverse teams is something that I love dearly. I'm passionate about bringing others around to the value of diversity in their teams, learning how to manage and accommodate our differences so that we all bring our authentic selves to work, regardless of where we are or who it is that we're working with. We're going to start with let me just set the scene with a story. In your sprint retrospective, Priya, a senior developer from Mumbai, quietly says, "I think we're asking the wrong questions entirely," and she brings the meeting up short. This team are 3 months into a WordPress build for a major retailer. The client stakeholder is difficult, responding to technical questions with vague statements like, "Just make it work better." Now, we're not going to talk about the indictment on the project manager. This is an illustration of other parts of the story. But they built a sophisticated product catalogue. It worked perfectly in testing, but Mark keeps insisting it's wrong and doesn't explain why. He joined a call saying, "This isn't what we need," and then hang up without any actionable feedback. The team had been struggling. They felt with something that was a WordPress problem, but Priya's insight completely reframed everything. Now, for context, this imaginary team is wildly diverse. The PM's from New Zealand, Mark is from Australia, Sari's from Jakarta, Priya from Mumbai, Ken from Singapore, and Raj from Chennai. And during the tense meeting, Priya speaks up and says, "Sometimes when people say the solution is wrong, they mean it doesn't fit their mental model of how the work should flow." And Sari nods and says, "In Indonesian culture, if I said something was wrong without explanation, it would mean I'm too embarrassed to admit that I don't understand it." Or Ken says, "Sometimes this isn't what we need really means this makes me look incompetent to my team." So instead of asking what was wrong technically, the next time they had a call, Priya suggested Mark show them his actual Monday morning workflow. And what emerged was eye-opening. Mark wasn't managing products in neat categories and taxonomies like they had built it out. He was constantly responding to urgent requests, updating pricing during phone calls, making quick changes between meetings. Their beautifully organised interface required multiple screens to update a price, something he did 20 or 30 times a day. Now again, this is a very fictional situation. I'm not sure it would come up like this, particularly if you have product owners and project managers involved, at least project managers in my team. However, this experience revealed technical problems aren't always technical problems. Sometimes they're cultural communication challenges in disguise. And the solution they come up with was a custom dashboard with lots of bulk actions. But that doesn't really matter. This is the fictional story. It gives us an insight into the things that I'm going to be talking about. We'll look at some of the challenges of homogenous workplaces, the hidden algorithms that flow through the team, and the effect that harnessing our diversity can impact our work, our business, and our productivity. And then we'll sprinkle in some how-tos, and I'll challenge you to leave this talk with some plans to explore what this could look like in your teams. So let's dive in. The problem we don't see is the trap of our workplaces becoming homogenous to the dominant culture. If you've been part of globally distributed teams, consistently hitting targets but perhaps not exceeding them, where on paper everything looks perfect, diverse backgrounds, strong skills, clear process, but something is missing, you might be delivering great competent work but not innovative work. Maybe the issue is that you're all solving problems the same way. There are in my view, 3 layers that inform what we're going to call the homogeneity trap. I'm using big words, but what I mean is having everybody conform to the dominant cultural narrative in the workplace. The first is the skills first fallacy. We hire for technical competencies, experience and cultural fit. We measure performance against standardised KPIs that are the same for everyone. And we promote people who solve problems efficiently, but when we say efficiently, we actually mean the way that we expect. And we design our processes that assumes one optimal approach. And the hidden cost of this is that cultural fit often means thinks like us. We reward conformity to existing problem-solving patterns, and alternative approaches get miscast as inefficient or unconventional. I'm going to do a lot of this today, sorry, there's lots of hidden quotes in here. And as an example, I once had a team member who was brilliant in one-on-ones, but silent in our sprint planning meetings. I was planning to give them feedback about speak up more, contribute more, become more of a team player. But before then, I did some reading to explore solutions on how to address when you have a team member who doesn't contribute. Instead, after reading that, I changed our approach. And all I did was send an agenda 24 hours before the meeting and asked people to prepare. Who knew? What a revelation. And suddenly this person became the most valuable contributor. Their analysis was more thorough and strategic than anyone else's. And when I asked them why, they explained, in my culture, you don't think out loud in meetings. That wastes people time with half-formed ideas. You think deeply first, and then you share something valuable. I've been running meetings that valued quick verbal processing, my cultural algorithm for collaboration, but it was silencing them. And once we mixed that async preparation with real-time discussion, our planning improved dramatically. Layer 2 of this trap is the innovation paradox. This is the contradiction that we create. We say we want innovation and fresh thinking, but our systems reward predictable, familiar approaches. We celebrate diversity in our hiring announcements, but then we homogenise all the thinking in our workplace in practice. And different perspectives get filtered out through professional socialisation. The real impact of this is that teams develop group thinking without realising it. Solutions become incremental rather than breakthrough, and cultural problem-solving wisdom gets buried under best practices. But who are they best practices for? Layer 3 of this trap is the algorithmic thinking trap. There's some big words. I really should thin this out because even as I was looking at the screen at the beginning, what does that even mean? And I really appreciate that so many of you are here, and I'm sure if you were here because you know me and you're like, I just want to see what Claire's doing. Anyway, the algorithmic thinking trap. Here's how this manifests. This is how we've always done it this way becomes the default. Process optimization replaces process innovation. We're trying to make things more and more conformist or more and more predictable, and we remove some of the opportunity for innovating. We are risk averse, and this gets disguised as efficiency. And cultural algorithms, or the way the dominant culture does things, becomes the only right way. And when this happens, this is what gets diminished. You lose the opportunity to explore or to draw from alternative problem-solving pathways that have developed over centuries within the DNA of your team or the people in your team. You get different definitions of what success looks like. You get varied approaches over time, relationships and decision-making. And the other thing that gets diminished is creative tension that can spark innovation. And the invisible cost of a homogeneous workplace is stagnation. Solutions that are good enough rather than transformative. Missed opportunities for breakthrough thinking and potentially competitive disadvantage in global markets. The other cost, and this is one that's dear to my heart as somebody who really loves people-first workplaces, is that high potential contributors self-edit their contributions. If you're anything like me and have been in the workplace for quite a while, as you transition between workplaces, you want to be able to draw from your previous experience to make your new workplace more efficient, more collaborative, more transparent. And ideally, this is what you've been hired for, to contribute your learned skills and your experience to make the place that you're in better or more efficient or more productive. But you get hindered for contributing those things because that's not the way we do things here. And rather than rock the boat, we feel like, or we can feel like, we have to contract our contribution to fit what the prevailing culture is. And skills and contributions that go unrecognised and unrewarded, in turn, become retention issues as people feel their full capacity isn't valued, and so they go elsewhere, or they seek to go elsewhere. And another, and the last on this list, is the impact could be market blindness. Solutions that only work for familiar contexts, missing cultural nuances in global customer bases, and products and services that may not translate well across other cultures. The good news is, this trap is entirely avoidable. In fact, the solution has been sitting in our teams all along, we just haven't been looking for it. The question isn't whether our team have valuable algorithms that we can tap into. It's whether we're creating the space for them to be shared. So let's get some definitions out of the way. I've talked about these big words. Let me actually tell you what I mean by using them. The term cultural algorithms isn't widely used in academia. If you're wanting to explore this kind of thing further in existing research, this would map to what people call cultural transmission, social learning, and loosely attached to gene culture coevolution. But those are the fields that you would dig into if you were actually interested in digging in. These fields incorporate the study of inherited behaviour patterns that function like code, running on human behaviour rather than computers. You also won't come away from this talk with a handout that maps existing cultures to specific characteristics. Even though I'll give you a couple of examples of what I call cultural algorithms and can point you in the direction of excellent resources to help understand how different cultures might show up in your workplace, my intent with this discussion is to challenge you to explore leveraging the diversity you already have or taking steps to increase the diversity of your workforce, to expose yourself and your teams to other ways of thinking as a means to ignite the possibility of more innovative approaches to solving your current and future problems. So what are they? Cultural algorithms are inherited problem-solving patterns developed over generations that are like software code but run on human behaviour that have been passed down through stories, practices, social norms and family structures. They form through geographic challenges, like island nations or landlocked countries. They form because of historical survival needs, like scarcity and abundance. And they form through social structures, like a collectivist or an individualist society will have different approaches in these areas. And some examples of such algorithms from various people groups might be the Haudenosaunee 7 generations principle, which is actually one that comes from the northeast part of Canada. We'll talk about what that actually means. There's Dutch poldering, again, one that I'd never heard of until I started researching some of this stuff, but again, we'll talk through what that looks like. And you might have heard of the Nigerian Ubuntu philosophy because of the software that is named after it. And that's a philosophy that says, I am because we are, and is a principle that is centred around the collective benefit of people. I'm going to expand on two. The first, the 7 generations principle from this area, or the northeastern part of Canada. comes from the great law of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, with written concepts that date back to between 1142 and 1500. Its algorithm is that every decision has to consider the impact of the seventh generation into the future. Decisions made today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations from now. It's transmitted through oral tradition and the great law of peace, and embedded in governance structures where leaders are mandated to think this way. And this creates a distinct problem-solving pattern. Always look forward, always consider the long-term consequences, and prioritise collective well-being over short-term individual gain. In Holland, polders, which are central to Dutch water management system, are the sections of land developed after dikes have been built around the marsh or lake and the water pumped out. And this is, you can see the polders, the fields on the right. As you're driving down the road, you'll often have a polder field on one side, 3 or 4 metres below you, and a canal on the other, almost at road level. And if the dikes aren't well maintained and water isn't constantly pumped out, the polder would revert back to marshland or lake. You're like, what does this have to do with anything deep? This is weird. But maintaining the system of 30,000 polders and the intricate web of canals can only happen with a huge amount of cooperation. You can't keep your property dry by yourself. Everyone needs to cooperate. During the Middle Ages, warring cities in the same polder were forced to cooperate to maintain them, or everybody would be flooded. The fact that this had to be maintained in order to maintain the landscape has bled into the culture of Dutch organisation and become not just a noun but a verb to describe the act of cooperatively building consensus. This is a very early example of what is called co-opetition, and it's with companies both competing and cooperating. And in actual fact, this is why I chose this one, because it feels quite analogous to the WordPress community, where people are effectively competing in WordPress or in the CMS markets, but also cooperate to make the software what it is that we use to compete. And why does this matter now? Because global complex challenges require diverse approaches, and remote work makes cultural algorithms more accessible than ever. While we're learning that AI can handle routine tasks, humans, in my opinion, will always be needed for creative problem solving. And better understanding the variations humans bring to that understanding makes for better outcomes. Now we get to talk about the effect of understanding these cultural artefacts and their impacts. Before we had remote work, the algorithms were trapped by geography. To experience poldering, you would move to Rotterdam. To experience Indigenous consensus building, you would work within those communities. But something remarkable happened when work went remote. We had access to more than just the prevailing culture in our region. Culture frames the way people look at the world and approach life events, communication, and their work tasks. In cross-cultural remote teams, different cultures literally see different problems in the same situation, like wearing different prescription lenses. Each reveals what the others miss. In exploring a workplace challenge with people from different cultural backgrounds, they don't just give different answers, they identify completely different problems. A Nordic might notice a power imbalance. An East Asian guest spots group harmony disruption. And an Indigenous Canadian sees a 7-generation impact. Same situation, 3 different lenses. It isn't about opinion, it's about inherited pattern recognition. Each culture has spent generations developing sensitivity to specific types of problems based on what mattered in their survival in their context. Different issues, different pathways, but as we'll see, pathways to solutions that we can also leverage. The multiplication effect of leveraging these algorithms is that 1 + 1 = 3, and when they combine. Here's why. Combination, in my opinion, creates innovation. And let's use product or web project development as an example. Western algorithm approach might be move fast and break things. The result might be a quick launch, but it could come with potential long-term problems. But if you attempted a 7 generations approach, which advises extensive collaboration, considering all the angles, it would take such a long time to reach a resolution, you might actually even miss a launch window or a market window. But what would it look like to combine the two? Move fast and break things into decisions that are easily reversed, but be deliberate in your choices about things that are not. The result? Speed when it matters, wisdom where it counts. So a couple of examples might be UX or UI iterations. You can change those quickly, you can revert them quickly. So they don't need a 7 generation approach to resolve. Feature experiments like feature flags, you can turn those on and off. So again, a quick approach is valuable and valuable. But a deliberate track might be, or the 7 generations approach or mindset might be useful when you're talking about decisions that are low reversibility, like your data architecture. Why slow? Migration costs are enormous and privacy implications last for a long time. Or environmental footprint. Why slow? Climate impact compounds over time, so thinking that through as you make your decisions around how you're going to structure or develop is rather important. And of course, accessibility. Why would you take a slower approach to that? Because retrofitting accessibility is 10 times harder than actually building it in from the get. Now what? The leadership challenge then becomes, what cultural algorithms do you have access to? What might you be missing? How does one audit your team to map their cultural problem-solving heritage and look for innovative opportunities? What breakthrough is waiting your team's combined algorithms? Most teams, all teams I would say, have these algorithms running in the background. They're just invisible, unacknowledged, and therefore unavailable for the team to learn from. The solution is to make them visible, and there's a number of ways you can do this. You could use interview techniques and actually sit down in one-on-ones or in groups and talk with your team and ask them questions. But not straightforward questions like, what's your approach to decision making? Ask something that's a little bit left of centre, like, how would your grandparent or parent or family or community approach this problem? This works because it bypasses that professional polish. People drop into their authentic cultural memory. It accesses transmitted wisdom, not just personal preference. And it creates a storytelling mode which reveals the why behind the what. You could dive into more background exploration, asking people about their environmental origins. What challenges shaped your community that we don't face here? And you might be listening for something like, we store food for months, but we also practice evacuation drills. And that might come from someone who lives in a typhoon, earthquake, or wildfire region. They're primed for rapid response, but with long preparation. And you can translate this into an approach that exemplifies dual thinking, fast response, slow resilience building. And it can be applied to incident management and technical debt prevention. Story collection is another way to build up your library of accessible cultural algorithms. Create a living repository. The format of a collected story might be from an indigenous Canadian member. My grandfather taught me, before you cut a tree, explain to it why. If you can't explain it, you shouldn't cut it. Not because trees have ears, but because if you can't articulate your reason, you don't understand your own need. Translation for the team might be, this is why James writes detailed RFC documents for small changes. He's running on an algorithm that says, if you can't explain it, you don't understand it enough to do it. However, it's important to state that in order for this kind of culture to flourish, we as leaders have to create the space that allows it. When people feel comfortable, engaging authentically, everyone learns something new. However, many prevailing workplace cultures avoid weird approaches. So in order to allow difference to be leveraged, you need a permission architecture that creates psychological safety. And when you're talking about things, using explicit statements that create permission, rather than saying everybody's voice is welcome, say, Sarah is going to share the Dutch poldering approach. It'll feel slower than we're used to. That's the point. We're testing whether slow consensus creates better outcomes than fast voting. And it works because it names the algorithm. It acknowledges that it's different from what's dominant in the culture. It frames the difference as an experiment, not a deviation, and it creates curiosity instead of judgment. The next way, or another way of making that space open for people to experiment or to talk about or to explore these cultural differences, is celebrating them. Instead of thanks for that perspective in a meeting, you could say, Marcus just applied 7-generation thinking to our database design. That 800-year-old algorithm just saved us from creating technical debt in 2025. And the pattern to do that is names the algorithm, acknowledges its origin, connects it to business value, and makes that invisible software visible. And the other way is in communication style accommodation. The way that we see these algorithms, or my experience of them has been most common, is in our communication styles. And this is an area where small accommodations can make a big difference. In reality, some cultures value direct confrontation, like the Dutch or the French. Some consider direct disagreement disrespectful, like many Asian cultures. Some cultures require a relationship before business and before you can get to a point of disagreement, like Latin America or the Middle East. And some cultures separate the person from the idea, like I do, as someone who has a Western analytical mindset. Our job as leaders is to create multiple valid paths for the same outcome. For example, around disagreement, you can offer options and make it clear to people that you recognise and respect that there are different ways that people will disagree. You might say that we have 4 options. Option A is direct challenge in a meeting. Option B is private feedback to the person proposing whatever it is that you're discussing. You might say that option C is a written alternative, or option D is build on yes, add to the idea rather than to oppose. Make it explicit. In this team, there are 4 valid ways to disagree. Pick the one that lets you show up authentically. And there are hands-on strategies that you could also use to explore integrating cultural algorithms. Like in project planning, using a rotating perspective. In sprint 1 planning, you might use a 7-generation lens, and the person running the meeting might say, what permanent consequences could this create? In sprint 2, you might use the Ubuntu lens and say, I am because we are, and ask, who isn't at this table who should be? How does this affect the collective? Sprint 3, you might approach with a Dutch lens. Who has veto power? Should they? Have we achieved genuine consensus or just majority? The key is not which lens is right, but what does each lens reveal that the others miss? You might have a cultural algorithm brainstorming session, and again, I must come up with different ways to describe this that are less tongue-twistery. But traditional brainstorming might say, everyone bring your ideas, or everybody shout your ideas, or put your ideas on a post-it note. But instead of just say, bring your ideas, why not talk about bring your inherited problem-solving approach and structure the workshop to elicit these underlying approaches, not just assume that everybody's going to come at it with the same approach. Or you can have mentoring partnerships, but not just where seniors mentor juniors, but instead have a cultural exchange where people from different cultures mentor each other reciprocally about how they would do things so that each can learn from the other. As leaders, or facilitators in trying to expose these algorithms, your job isn't to decide which is best or to make everybody think the same way. Create a melting pot where cultures, or to create a melting pot where these cultures dissolve. Your job is to make these visible, to create safety for authentic expression, build infrastructure for cross-cultural learning, and recognise cultural contributions as innovation fuel. The question, how many generations of inherited wisdom are running in your team right now? And are you letting them teach each other? And then, because I'm also all about the data, track these innovation metrics before and after implementing cultural algorithms to see how they adjust and change the output and the outcomes that you're working towards. And the key is measuring both the quantity and the quality of innovative thinking, not just the final outputs. So you can see the benefits and iterate and improve. Am I going for time?
You have 12 minutes.
Oh, easy. Okay. Yeah, I can do the last slide. I just wasn't sure. So here are some innovation metrics you can track before and after. Quantitative metrics, like the solution diversity, number of distinctly different approaches that are posed for each problem. Time to an alternative solution. How quickly teams generate a second approach when the first one hits obstacles. The frequency of how often you see cross-cultural collaboration happen. And the success rate, percentage of innovation ideas that actually get deployed, or innovative ideas that get deployed. Then there are qualitative indicators. Breakthrough versus incremental ratio. Are you getting more game-changing solutions versus small improvements? How often does someone question the fundamental premise of how you approach problems? Which team members are contributing innovative ideas, and is it expanding beyond the usual suspects? And failed fast learnings. Are teams able to quickly identify when a culturally influenced approach isn't working and then pivot to change it? And then there are innovation metrics. Output quality of meetings. Are you getting more actionable, more diverse ideas? Decision-making speed. Are better cultural algorithms awareness showing up in your team? Are they leading to faster decisions because you can explore the right approaches up front? And then insights from your retrospectives. The number of aha moments about differences in problem solving during team reflections. So, there you have it. This has been enormously interesting for me to kind of research and pull together. I really loved reading about other people from this region and being able to pull that in. There are obviously different approaches where I come from. We're Australian, very Western, but I have the opportunity to work for a lot of people in Southeast Asia. So there's been lots of opportunities to kind of learn through there, which is really interesting. And I have recommended materials that I'll post up on my blog in the next week or so, probably on the plane on the way home on the weekend. DWETEAL.com. D, my name, full name, DEETEAL.com. And here are some of the other places you can find me. As Michelle mentioned, I'm a trustee for the Future of Team. If you're at all interested in seeing more women get into C-suite positions in the WordPress community, we have this mentoring program. We put people in existing leadership roles with people who are interested in getting there, and have a 6 or 8 week mentoring season with them, and have seen some really great results. And it's, like Michelle said, a really rewarding experience to be on either side of that. That's the podcast. And I'm also on the Future of Team podcast with James Dury, who you might know as one of the organisers here. And there's WPN codes if you're interested in that. There's a QR code for the website here. Sorry, did I do that too? Any questions? Do my best to answer.
For questions, I'll come over to the mic.
So, if one is not in a leadership position, but is at an organization that like you mentioned in the talk, there's this idea of like, oh yeah, we're going to hire diversity, we're going to celebrate diversity, but then when you're actually in the thick of it, you have this sort of homogenous thinking and just sort of this assumption, and the things that get rewarded are the things that always get rewarded, that sort of thing. How, from sort of a, do you have ideas? Maybe?
I haven't thought that part.
Yeah.
How do you do that from the bottom up
Right,
rather
exactly.
than the top down?
Yeah. And I don't know is an okay answer.
Yeah, I don't know, but I would love to explore that. I love being able, if you're working with people that are from, I mean, you can't do that at a macro level, right? So what can you do at a micro level? What can you see? Who do you have access to? Who are you working with? What are the problems and solutions that you're trying to resolve where you are? And how can you access that in one-on-one conversations, in being able to sit down and say to somebody, so this is how I would approach that. How would you approach that? How would your grandparents approach that? Is there something that we can learn from each other here? Like that, reciprocal mentoring doesn't have to happen across the board. That's something that you could start in the smaller teams. And I think one of the interesting things would be to see, as you're starting to do that, if you were starting to do that, how much that would spill over, how much you can then leverage that through the people that you report to and say, hey, we've got this thing going on here, this is really cool, how can we start spreading that out? But ask those questions, build those relationships, because it's not just something that happens overnight. This is relationship building and getting to know people. It's that whole sense of, even that Ubuntu thing, I am because we are. It's like, I'm not just seeing how we do things and the checklist of all of the parts and processes that we go through. I'm seeing the person here. What do they bring? And how can we learn from each other and share that with the wider team?
And I really like the thing that you said too. You dropped a phrase that lit up something in my brain. You said melting pot, and you said it in a way that meant that we should not have a melting pot. And that coming from the United States, I remember growing up, in all our classes, everybody talks about the United States being a melting pot. And the idea of melting everybody together and melting everybody's cultures together and just becoming this conglomerate as being a bad thing, and actually like, no, actually we should pick these apart and like identify where these things come from. That's a really, like, I love that. Thank you.
No, thanks. It's not necessarily good or bad, but I feel like losing that sense of what makes us who we are and what we bring, I think, is disappointing. It's like, I've got some amazing, I'm staying with friends in Vancouver on the way home who I met through Human Made, who are from India. And growing up where I did, in a very, very white part of a very, very white, well, not strictly white country, I grew up in New Zealand, but all of my frame of references was all very specific. And all of that nod to let's melt everybody together would have completely removed the opportunity that I had to go, that I have now, or that it wouldn't have even crossed my mind. It was like, well, that's too different, that's too unusual. Whereas now, I'm, eating vegetarian food and, joining with this family that I'm like, I would never have had that opportunity, and I would hate to feel like we have to make everybody be the same because we lose so much. Thanks, Chris.
I didn't have a question, more a comment on the melting pot as we were talking here. When I grew up rural Alberta, which is kind of by the Rocky Mountains in Vancouver, 12 hours driving.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love it out there. But my rural teacher, and I was maybe grade 4, very innocent at the time, described the U.S. as a melting pot, but Canada as a tossed salad.
Cool.
Which I thought was really great, and I kind of take that as well. And but with building teams, is that we want to enjoy the tomatoes and the lettuce and the whatever else, the cheese and the whatever is in the salad.
Yeah.
As opposed to that melting pot idea. So I guess just something as an idea to kind of consider. It sounds kind of funny.
I think it's interesting. I mean, in the times that we are living at the moment, and we're seeing so many initiatives towards diversity being hindered, squashed, removed, erased. I grew up in New Zealand, and we have very strong Indigenous community there, but even in these days, and I value that enormously. I claim no indigeneity at all, but I walk under the of the Māori carvings as I come into Auckland and cry because I feel so proud that this is part of my heritage. But I'm seeing so many more initiatives, I'm getting political now, but so many more initiatives to reduce that because there are so many people that are afraid of that difference rather than, and are trying to make New Zealand more homogenous but reduce that difference instead of celebrating it and valuing it. And so a big part of why I'm kind of interested in diving into this stuff is that sense of, hey, we do all have something valuable to contribute, and difference doesn't have to be scary. It can be valued and appreciated and leveraged.
How do you walk the line between the dominant culture basically appropriating somebody else's culture and way of thinking and celebrating and honoring and that culture?
That's a really, really valid, valuable question, and I don't have a whole lot of solutions and answers to it, but I think part of it is that continual naming of that difference. That this 7 generations approach here, that was where we use it, or Dutch poldering as an example, is keeping the name of it there rather than folding it in and saying this is us now. I think it's keeping that recognition and talking about and promoting the value of it, or recognising the value of it and talking about the value of it, not as something that is yours, but as something that you see, that you have borrowed or that you are using and sharing, rather than something that is now. It's that sense of open-handedness of it rather than holding it. And I feel like doing that is a big part of that would probably be, and again, I haven't worked this through in terms of here's how we're doing it in our organisation, because this does not live in the organisation that I'm with. But that's how I would see it happening. Do you have any ideas? Anybody else? Lois?
So I come from Vancouver, from the NC Traditional Territory of North Dakota, just for mission status. And one thing that we do, according to their protocol, is that we ask their permission to share their teachings, and they always give permission.
Beautiful.
But it's that act of asking and connecting with the elders and the knowledge leaders. So whatever culture that you're learning from, seek out the knowledge leaders, seek out the teachers, and make those connections and acknowledge their culture and their contribution.
Yeah, we have a similar thing, and I heard the acknowledgement of the land from, we do the same thing in Australia. It's becoming more and more prevalent. There are multiple thousands of indigenous tribes and regions, and we do the similar kind of thing here in terms of acknowledging the lands that we're on, but then also I love that idea of actually talking to people and seeking that out and asking that permission. I think that's beautiful. Any other thoughts? Questions?
You used the term cooperation.
Co-opetition.
I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's a STEM competition called First Robotics Competition.
Yeah.
And they use that term.
Awesome.
They do their game design. So each year there's a cooperation element in their robotics game, and it basically means that the two teams have to do a skill to help them succeed in the rest of the game.
That's cool.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Let me still add a little joke, but
Please.
yeah, last night I was talking to my wife for 23 years. She's in the U.S. I'm here, and I said something to her to help her, but the way I said it, she didn't like it. But I told her last night, so I'm going to show her this thing. I don't know if she'll watch it, to show her that my culture is different. That she's from Trinidad, and I'm from the U.S., from a hard part of New York, and I say things in a way of how I grew up. And I was even thinking about it last night, and I grew up very different than she did.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to get her to understand that, but maybe your talk will help. We'll see.
Maybe. That'd be really, it would be really interesting to hear if it helps in a relationship. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Lois. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
a break, and next talk is a keynote. They might be tearing down this wall to make the room bigger. That's what I heard. I heard a rumor. My notes say that to be here for our next keynote at 11:15, which is Dave Weiner, and I'm sure that it'll be obvious at the time when it happens. But thank you all. You have a break. Go have some coffee, afternoon, have snacks.